This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Clara Cook, and today my guest is Annie. Annie, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Annie, what number of episodes is this for the Xcast for you? Like, how many times have you been on the Xcast now?
Oh, I did all things, and I've done Sure Kill. I interviewed Kim Newton, which was such an honor. And then I did the Fight the Future minutes. So a few. Am I missing one?
Alpha. You did Alpha with me.
Alpha. Yes.
Yes. So you're a veteran. You're an Xcast veteran now.
I'm a veteran. Yep. I'm old. Throw me away.
She sounds so enthusiastic. Well, this episode today that we're going to talk about is also about a veteran. Yeah.
Nice segue. Ooh.
Is it though? I mean,
impressive.
It's not really about veterans, but anyway, this guy is a veteran.
He is one. It opens with them talking about that.
It does. So today's episode is Salvage or Salvage or Savage. Savage. How do you?
If you're American, it's just Salvage.
That's what I was trying to say. The American
we're not fancy.
Salvage. It originally aired on the 14th of January 2001. This is the 9th episode of season 8 of The X-Files. It was written by Jeffrey Bell and directed by Rod Hardy. Now, it's worth noting before we go on to talk about the episode that Jeffrey Bell has written for The X-Files before. He wrote The Rain King, which was in season 6. He wrote Alpha, which is one of the ones that we analysed, which is in season 6. And also wrote the Goldberg Variation and Signs and Wonders, both which were in season 7. So, he's come back after having some success on the X-Files. I mean, some of these are liked by people and some of them aren't as liked.
Some are fan favorites. I mean,
some are fan favorites,
yeah.
I mean, I think Rain King's a bit of a divisive one because some people really don't like it and some people really love it. It's like Marmite, you either like it or don't.
I don't know what that is.
Marmite. As far as I'm concerned, if you don't know what Marmite is, you're living in a blessed land.
Okay.
But if you're my husband, he would be like, I can't believe you never had Marmite. You're missing out. It's like Vegemite. It's like, I don't know if there's an American version. It's like a yeast spread that people put on toast.
Okay.
But the tagline is, whenever they advertise Marmite, is you either love it or hate it. Because people in the UK either love it or they hate it. It's got one of those things that people have strong opinions about. So Rod Hardy, who directed this episode, has also directed 2 other season 8 episodes, Roadrunners and VNN, whatever. Anyway, so
VNN.
Make of that what you will, or we can talk about, the writing of this episode, the directing of this episode, and whether or not we feel like these guys did better in this episode than they did in other ones, or didn't do quite as well. As we may come to it. So in this episode, a summary of it is Doggett and Scully encounter a man who's believed to be dead from Gulf War syndrome, but who has come back to life. And surprisingly, to everybody's surprise. And what they discover is the man is made of metal and he's enacting vengeance on those he believes created him in metal. Basically, those who gave him this particular condition that has meant that he is now a man of metal. So a little bit of fact here. Salvage was loosely based on Tetsuo the Iron Man, a 1989 Japanese cyberpunk film by cult film director Shinya Tsukamoto. Please ignore my pronunciation of anybody's names in any episode of any of the Xcast anywhere. So it was written by Jeffrey Bell before Robert Patrick, who plays Doggett, was cast as Agent Doggett, but the film coincidentally echoes the plot of the 1991 film Terminator 2, Judgment Day, in which we all know Robert Patrick starred in as a android who has the ability to basically be destroyed and then kind of collect all his little metal body parts together and zip back into his body so that he becomes this like molten metal man that's indestructible. And this episode does include reference to Patrick's role, and the actual reference in the actual episode is written in homage to Robert Patrick in Terminator 2, but the episode itself was written before he was cast as Doggett. So the episode itself isn't a homage, supposedly, but it has references in it that are a homage to his character.
I didn't know that it was written before he was cast.
Yeah, I know, because you wouldn't know that watching the episode, would you? Because
No.
you'd be like, they're just ripping off Terminator 2, kind of.
And it's set in the middle of the season, so I had assumed it came in later. Yeah, that's fascinating.
I think it's typical of this particular writer that he has this big idea that's kind of like a good idea, and then it's executed poorly. But we'll go on to talk about that. So the IMDb score for this episode is 6.8 out of 10. Annie, is that fair?
I think it's fair. It's not particularly offensive. It's not particularly great. It's kind of boring. And I guess IMDb tends to kind of skew upward. It wouldn't be my rating, but it's not a terrible rating, I guess.
So what would be your rating?
Probably a 6, a solid 6.
Ooh. So that's pretty generous, I believe. I mean, we'll go talk about what we liked about it when we didn't, but I think I would give it a much lower rating. I think personally, I'd probably give it a 4 out of 10. I actually was just telling you just before we start recording that I'm rewatching this because I can't for the life of me remember it at all. I don't remember the first time I watched it. I don't remember the storyline of it. I couldn't tell you anything about the episode. And I think Sarah Blair, ex-cast, producer extraordinaire, said to us, this is the episode you guys are going to be covering. And I was like, what? Could not remember this episode at all. And so I had to rewatch it. And when I did rewatch it, I fell asleep halfway through. And so that just goes to show you what a scintillating piece of television it is if it can't actually keep me awake. I was in bed watching it, so maybe that was part of the problem.
You were too comfortable for a boring episode.
But I don't want to like give it anything lower than a 4 because I feel like lower than a 4 pardon me, I feel like lower than a 4 we're starting to get into like Testos, Bichos, space. I mean,
whoa, space is adorable. Mulder is adorable in space, and it's not really, is it offensive? I can't remember if it's offensive, but like Mulder makes, okay, this is not a space episode.
It's a poor story though.
Okay. But that's a little rude because Mulder's adorable. So
yeah,
anyway, not the space episode. We'll debate this some other time.
But yeah, I mean, it's not sunk to the lower depths of some of the more awful episodes of the X-Files. So, you're right, and some are genuinely offensive. So
let me tell you, I gave Alpha, I think, a 4.5. And this was not offensive like Alpha. I thought Scully did a good job. So I was like, I can't go that low if I gave Alpha such a low rating.
That's true. That's true.
That's why I went a little higher.
I think I kind of find Alpha sort of hilarious in some ways. So if that's the case, then I'm entertained. Whereas I did not find this in any way entertaining. Like I didn't find it funny. I didn't find it like so bad that it's amusing. And I didn't find it like so good that it riveted me and kept me entertained. I just found it a slog to get through. And I think that's probably why I put low. But the thing is, even when X-Files is bad, I mean, it's not Babylon, let's be honest. But even when the X-Files bad, it's still, I think at times, more watchable than a lot of other really bad television.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? So there are things about this episode that I thought were good, and that's why I didn't give it anything too lower than a 4. Maybe by the time we finished, I might inch up towards a 5. I want to try and be generous. So,
see, because you talking about it made me think maybe I should have gone 5.5, but I don't know. I guess let's talk about it and see what conclusion we come to.
Yeah, we might change our minds. So let's dig into this episode.
Sounds good.
So the intro starts off with a man named Kurt telling a widow named Nora about the death of her husband, Ray. So obviously, I think the implication is Ray has died a few days before, or like literally a week before. And this is Kurt comforting Nora because the funeral just happened or whatever, and he's there at her house. And I just wanted to point out that I thought Kurt and Ray were the two most middle-aged American male names that you could possibly hear.
That's so true.
Kurt and Ray. Anyway, so Ray was 41, Kurt is sort of saying, and it appears he got sick and died after coming back from the Gulf War. This little scene, I felt like Kurt and Ray were basically, Kurt and Nora. The dialogue was very much like they were telling the audience what happened rather than actually talking to each other. So it was a bit clunky, very pedestrian sort of dialogue. Kurt doesn't think Ray died due to Gulf War syndrome. He is actually rather unsympathetic. So just before we go on to talk about the teaser, Gulf War syndrome, I felt like I should let people know what Gulf War syndrome is, because I don't know the age of all of our listeners, and some of our listeners may be kind of too young to really remember the Gulf War or anything about the Gulf War. But Gulf War syndrome is a chronic and a multi-symptomatic disorder. Gulf War syndrome affects people who fought in the Gulf War, basically, veterans of the Gulf War. No one's quite sure of the causes of it, but it's been linked to chemical warfare agents and possibly chemicals that were given to soldiers by their own country, their own army, as a preventative measure in case they were likely to be exposed to chemical weapons. There's also psychological factors in play as well, and sort of like trauma and PTSD has not been ruled out as a contributing factor or cause to Gulf War syndrome as well. And I guess it's another symptom of like the sort of wider issue of the permanent effect the war has on soldiers who fight in war. You know, it's another example of soldiers coming back from battle, from war, from conflict with permanent psychological and physical damage that can basically affect their ability to live a healthy and successful life afterwards, which is obviously, it's very, very sad. And there's been a lot of study into it and a lot of sort of stuff published on it and everything, if you're interested. So anyway, Nora's convinced that Ray died of Gulf War syndrome, that he was given something by doctors or by the army when he was out there fighting, and that's why he's dead. Kurt thinks it wasn't Gulf War syndrome, and he's actually unsympathetic. Like, he sort of says maybe it was just his time, which I feel is a really weird thing to say.
It's not, and especially right after the funeral, like it's fresh. It just happened. This poor woman who is clearly grieving.
And 41-year-olds, I mean, I'm not that far off 41. 41's quite young, and I don't feel like it's just his time.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's sort of something you say to somebody who's like 90, 92 and has died and lived a long life. It was just his time. Do you know what I mean?
I guess if it was just his time, meaning he was very sick and it was his time to go, but it did come off as unsympathetic. It wasn't said in a tender way to the grieving widow.
And at one point, he says, you just need a good night's sleep. Like, a good night's sleep is going to solve bereavement.
Yeah. Honestly, I thought they were going to go into having an affair because, like you, I didn't really remember this episode. I think I watched season 8 right before the pandemic started, but then not since. And again, it didn't really stick with me. And before that, I hadn't seen it probably since the original run. And I was like, oh, they're probably having an affair. And that's why he's unsympathetic, because he's like, oh, the other guy's out of the way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't end up being the case. But
and I mean, as we'll see later on, more like friends of Ray, or at least one other friend of Ray,
so-called friends,
show up at Nora's house. And I'm like, what are all these men doing?
Yeah.
Comforting the widow. But anyway, So obviously it's quite clear Nora's upset and she wants to blame somebody for her loss. And to be honest, I think that's kind of a natural reaction for someone who has lost someone so close to them and also lost somebody when they're young. And I think, people want to feel like tragedy happens for a reason. And sometimes, sadly, it doesn't. So then you get a shot from outside the house looking into the window of the living room, and it's clear they're being watched by somebody outside the house. And then the view, the sort of camera angles and the view, obviously from the person who's watching them, this creepy viewpoint of this onlooker is coming out from behind the bushes and going around the side of the building. I thought that was quite effective.
It was cool, yeah.
It's kind of like good with the music, obviously. Mark Snow, again, good music.
Very spooky and ominous. And who could be watching them? Is it supernatural?
Yeah,
a guy? Yeah.
I mean, immediately I was like, it's got to be the husband.
Oh, you knew? Okay. I wasn't sure.
I just kind of sort of sensed it, or at least some monster or something.
Sure.
And then we see from that point of view, Kurt getting into his car and driving away and lighting a cigarette. And I had two thoughts. First thought was when he started the car, I was like, that sounds like an incredibly environmentally unfriendly car. This isn't like gurgle of that engine.
Did not register with me, but yeah, probably. It looked old and clunky as it is.
And then he starts, but then he can't, we find out later he works in a salvage yard. So that's probably why he's got some old car. And then he starts lighting a cigarette while not looking while he's driving. And no one ever do that, please. Don't do that. And then suddenly he looks up and he sees a man in the middle of the road and he's shocked because he's going to try and brake and he doesn't want to hit somebody. And he tries to stop, but doesn't stop and plows straight into him. And then the car sort of splits into two halves as the stationary man just standing there slices right through the car.
It's a really cool effect.
It's a really cool effect. And I think it took a lot of effort and sort of puzzling out and a certain amount of creative artistry to be able to produce that effect. Like they had different shots and they spliced them together. So yeah, what do you think? Like, I mean, is this the best effect of the whole episode? Did they front load this at the beginning of the episode and it's just kind of like comes too soon?
So I just recorded Sure Kill with Russell Hugo and it felt like they had a really good idea for the teaser and then they had to build the episode around that.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel the same way about this one where it's a really cool effect at the very beginning and then the rest is kind of bland. I don't really know a better term for it. How do you build an episode around that? As for the special effects, I mean, yeah, that's probably the most eye-catching thing in the entire episode. But I do want to say that, and we'll get probably into this a little bit more later, but shout out to the lighting people. The way that they do, they cast half of Ray's face in shadow, the other half in light. That was really effective as well. And I don't know how much time that would take. It probably takes quite a bit of time. That I thought was also really good. And they do it multiple times over the course of the episode. But as for like the major effects, yeah, this is probably the best in the entire 42 minutes.
Yeah, and I think there is also something disturbing about it too. It's not just that, like, obviously it's like it's fantastical that like a man could be have so much mass that he's able to sort of basically split a car that's like oncoming into his body. But it's also the idea of a car smashing into a human being. I mean, that's always a disturbing thought, I think. Human beings are more normally in normal situations when it's not the X-Files are more fragile than cars.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the idea of somebody hitting a human being in the middle of the street is I think a disturbing idea anyway. And in a typical way, the X-Files takes the ideas that are disturbing and can sometimes seem sort of everyday. I mean, you sometimes on the news and stuff, you see footage of like CCTV footage of somebody plowing into a zebra crossing, or it's like a horrible idea, it's a horrible thought. Anyone who's ever seen someone hit by a car, I have seen someone hit by a car, like it happens very quickly, and it almost seems like this big behemoth of a machine is plowing into this small kind of fragile organic creature, which is the human, and it's like machine meets man, and it's a very nightmarish kind of destructive image. And I think the fact that they've kind of played with that here and they've made the man, I mean, almost like a brick wall, pretty much.
Indestructible.
Yeah, indestructible.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we see stuff like that with Marvel movies and stuff, and, superhero movies where a character will withstand some incredible force coming at them. And so it has sort of echoes of that too. And then Kurt is obviously very seriously injured from the car crash or the crash, but he's alert, and he's kind of alert. He's awake, and he sees the man he's plowed into through the windscreen, and he says, "Ray," and I'm like, "Yeah, spoiler. The X-Files spoiled itself." And then he's like, "Ah," and Ray reaches through the windscreen and like smashes through the windscreen and grabs that Kurt, and we hear Kurt scream, and then it's
do you think that it would have been better? I'm sorry, I interrupted you there.
No.
Do you want to say it again?
I just said fade to black, that's all.
Okay, I'm sorry. Do you think it would have been more effective or more interesting for the episode had they saved that reveal for whenever Doggett reveals it to Scully? Would that have been better, or
I think
wouldn't have made much of a difference?
I know it's hard to say, because you need something exciting in the teaser to grab the viewer and keep them watching. And they want some spooky mystery right at the beginning that's like, what? How is that even possible? Like, how does that happen? How does a human being do that in the teaser? But at the same time, though, we know so much more about this crime than Doggett and Scully do, that by the time they start investigating it, I sort of feel like we're slowly watching Doggett and Scully catch up with us as the viewers.
Yeah.
And like in the most sort of slow, boring, procedural way.
I just want the listeners to know that Clara looks really bored when she's talking about this.
I'm like rolling my eyes to the ceiling. So that is a problem. Yeah, I think it is a problem that we know this. And I think the pacing of this episode, I think some things should have been cut and turned around. And well, yeah, I don't know how. I'm not sure I have any solutions.
Okay. I was just wondering your opinion, if you would have been more intrigued had you discovered it along with Doggett and Scully.
What about you? What do you think?
I think maybe I didn't think about it until you mentioned it, but that might have been kind of cool. Like, you already have the element, the supernatural element. You have a man who was hit by a car and did not die. In fact, he warped the car completely, where he's standing in the middle of where the hood should be. So that's really cool. You're already like, all right, something's going on here. I feel that should be enough to grab the viewer, and then slowly find out that it's actually Ray, who is supposed to be dead, FYI.
Yeah, so you could have had Kurt just scream.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, but like not say Ray. And I mean, we actually see
also
Ray's
that delivery.
Face.
I don't know. It didn't work for me. So some of the lines, it wasn't the lines, it was the delivery of the lines that just felt so not natural, I guess. And I don't know if that's the director. It must have been the director. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's the actors, because some of these actors are good actors and they've been in other stuff. I think sometimes it's the way the characters are written too. It's like, they're not bad actors, they're like bad characters. Okay, so we have the Q titles. And I just want to point out to everybody, and I know it's not a very fair thing to say, but the thing I hate about the season 8 titles is the image of Mulder falling into Scully's eye. I'm sorry. It just drives me crazy. I can't even look. I don't know why. It's just the image of Mulder falling. Anyway, moving on.
Is it because you feel like you're going to get something in your eye, or is it the more suggestive nature of that visual?
It just seems hokey to me.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair.
I just had this image of like David Duchovny like being pushed off like a little ledge onto like a mat and then filming him in slow motion, or him like on wires suspended pretending to fall. I don't know why, but for some reason it really bothers me.
Okay.
So, but the music is nice, and as usual the X-Files does a great job with the spooky theme tune
always.
So then we get the next scene. So they're in Munis, Indiana, which I'm sure we'll come back to talk about, because somebody in the mailbag on the X-Cast basement.
Muncie, right?
Oh, it's in Muncie. Well, here, like, I'm just going to continue my tradition of mispronouncing stuff. But somebody in the X-Cast basement group, which is the X-Cast Facebook fan group, listener group has said that they actually used to come. They grew up from somewhere near Muncie.
Am I crazy? I thought it was Muncie, but
what we need is
I'm not saying I fell asleep during the episode, but maybe it didn't hold my attention as well as it should have.
I don't think anybody actually mentioned the name of the town though, did they?
Lorena calls Nora at a certain point, and she needs the number for, I guess she says, does she say the name? Ray Pierce in Muncie, Indiana?
Muncie. Okay. I'm going to have to remember it's Muncie because, I'm going to call it Munis a couple of times. But anyway, so first of all, it's really early in the morning.
Hold on. I'm going to look it up really fast because I don't want to. I feel like we did this whole thing and now I'm like, what if I'm wrong?
You need like a YouTube pronunciation video.
It just says Midwestern town. I'm going to go with Muncie.
It must be Muncie. I can't imagine that a town in America is called Munis.
I mean, you never know.
I'm thinking of Eunice.
Maybe.
So they're in Indiana, and I don't really understand why Doggett and Scully are in Indiana at 8 a.m. in the morning in Muncie. Is it? Yeah, Muncie.
Muncie?
Muncie. I'm saying Muncie. Okay, that's what I'm calling it now. Anyway, so there's a nice shot of Scully. There's a nice shot of Scully through the blood-spattered, cracked car windshield. And that's really cool. Like as if you were in the car and you're looking through the actual cracked windshield, which has it's got a bit, it's not cracked, it's got a huge hole in it. And it's got blood on the jagged edges of the hole. And you can see Scully through it. Let's see her looking into the car. And that's a really cool shot, I think. And then there's another really cool shot of her standing in like the middle of the sort of split in the front hood of the car. And that's really cool too. So obviously
I really like that.
They had this prop. Yeah. And I'm surprised they didn't make more of this prop. I kind of was hoping that Doug and Scully would kind of scooch into the into that little gap there, or like they would walk around the car a couple of times. Because I was like, it must have cost a lot of money to make that prop, and they should use it as much as possible. And so Doggett walks up and says that Kurt, who was driving the car, has not been found. No one knows where he is. He's not answering his phone. And the local police have estimated that the car was going 40 miles an hour. So when it crashed, the object that it crashed into would need the density of 4,300 times the density of steel in order to actually make that dent in the car, make that split in the car. So first of all, I was quite impressed at the maths and like physics calculation of the local police. But they neglected to search the area for Kurt's body, but they managed to do some calculations. Yeah, they managed to do some calculations. And I also was really interested to hear that this was quite an interesting concept. Like that the thing that this car like hit must have been incredibly strong and dense. And Scully just seems bored by the fact.
Yeah.
So that's one of the problems here, I think, and not only in this scene, but in lots of scenes that sort of follow. And Scully seems utterly disengaged. And maybe it's 8 a.m. It's 8 a.m. in the morning. I'd be disengaged at 8 a.m. in the morning. Maybe she's wondering why they're in Indiana. I think we're all wondering why they're in Indiana. But I also don't understand why she's so bored.
I was listening to the early episodes of season 8 that were released, and people were saying that there's more of an energy to the season. And again, I just recorded Sure-Kill, and there's no energy. And I don't know if it has to do with the direction. I don't know if it has to do with the writing or just the plot. But in these 2 episodes, I'm not loving season 8. I know I didn't get the best, most interesting episodes, but there's this like general sense of, I don't know if it's boredom or sleepiness or yeah.
And I mean, I think even if it's not the best storyline in the world, I think that fact alone that Doggett brings to her would cause somebody to be like, wow, really?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, she doesn't have to react like that, but she can at least be a little bit interested. There's no indication that, yeah. And even then when she finds the body of Kurt, which we're going to talk about, her reaction is just like, hey, I found a body, found a dead person. Like, she doesn't seem alarmed, surprised, or shocked. And I know she's seen a lot of dead bodies, but I mean, this is a really underwhelmed reaction.
I will say that maybe Scully is the gears in her head are turning when he's giving her this information, right?
Yeah.
She's maybe trying to formulate some theory, a Mulder-esque theory. And maybe it's not that she's not surprised, but maybe she's just trying to work it out in her head. I don't know. But that is, it's all pretty shocking. And one would think that she would be more surprised, especially as a scientist and a physicist and just a generally curious person.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about it too, but the theory that she comes up with, I was quite surprised. I mean, the thing, part of the problem is that we the audience know, the viewers know what happened. So we're watching two people who don't know what happened slowly come to the realization of what happened. And it's not really massively entertaining. But anyway, I should mention here that Ray Pearce is played by Wade Williams, the actor. So he's the man who split the car by standing in the middle of the road. He's been loads of stuff, but I think he's most well known for his role. He had quite a lot of screen time in the TV series Prison Break, which I've never seen, but apparently he was quite popular with that. So when the police lift the car, so as Doggett and Scully are talking, they lift the car and off the road, and both Scully and Doggett find the impression of a man's shoes right almost where the car, the edge of the split, right in sort of the center, almost in the center of the car. And typical scene, Doggett's the skeptic being like, a man couldn't have done this. A man could never have withstood the sort of impact of this car. And Scully sort of seems a bit bored, but she does think it's a man. So she comes up with this theory that it's a man. And yet again, I know it's season 8 and Scully's the believer and Doggett's the skeptic, but this is a bit weird. Like, there's no reason why I feel like Scully should throw physics out the window and suddenly come up with this theory. But we need somebody to have that theory, don't we, for this episode to progress. Nora runs to the crime scene. So Nora is Ray's widow, looking for Curtis. And I was quite surprised how upset she was looking for Curtis. I'm like, what's going on between Nora and Curtis?
That's what I thought. Yes.
Like, nothing, it turns out.
Because that could have added some spice to the episode.
And so while Doggett is talking to Nora, like, who are you? And like, how do you know Curtis? Scully's like, Agent Doggett. Yo, dude. There's something in this wheelie bin over here. And also typical thing, right? Crime scene investigation, police fucking everywhere. The whole street is cleared. There's police tape everywhere, but no one's checked the bins. And then Scully sort of waltzes into the crime scene, walks over to a bin, flips the lid open, and is like, yo, guys, I found a body.
This is why they call the FBI in, to check the trash bins.
To check the trash bins.
Someone has to. It's not going to be local PD, okay?
Oh, dude. It's like crime scene have been everywhere, and there's a gun in the middle of the room, and Scully just walks in and says, hey, has anyone seen this gun right here in the middle of the room? Like, it's so painful. But anyway, so Scully's standing there by the nearby wheelie bin being like, dead body. And Doggett walks over and he's like, Doggett does have a reaction. Doggett's like you can see Robert Patrick's face be like, ugh.
It's pretty gross.
It's pretty gross. And I get that Scully's seen a lot of gross bodies, but this is, anyway, I would expect more from her. But so the Curtis is all squished up like he's like kind of crouching almost in the bin with holes punched in his forehead. Like big bloody holes in his forehead.
Yeah, big holes in his face.
And Scully sort of deadpan says something like, well, we're not going to get anything out of him.
Does she say that? I didn't catch that.
She doesn't say that, but she says something like, well, he can't enlighten us on the situation. And I assume they wheel that little man out there to the morgue. But anyway, I also don't understand why Scully thinks this is Curtis, because it could be the man that the car hit. But she immediately knows it's Curtis. Like, maybe they know what he looks like. I don't know. Maybe they got a photo of him or something. Well, they've seen a photo of him.
Maybe. I think she just assumed, well, I guess it could have been the person who was hit by the car. I don't know. They did say that, well, Doggett very astutely said that whoever was hit by the car would be splattered across the road. Maybe Scully assumed that whoever was hit by the car, because she's standing by her theory that the man was hit by the car and survived. So maybe she just assumed it was Ray. I don't know.
And the sort of like imbalance in dialogue here between Scully's like really bored, kind of just straightforward dialogue, and Doggett's sort of semi-hilarious dialogue where he's like, he says the line later on. I think he says a line which I think I wrote down because I thought it was hilarious.
Dollars for donuts.
Dollars for donuts.
Yes.
Yeah. And he sort of says, "Oh, you'd be splattered from here to like Kingdom Come or something," or whatever he says.
Yeah. Something like that.
And I mean, I like that about Doggett. And it's not just this episode. Doggett also uses expressions in other episodes, and I like that about Doggett. I think it's
he's a New York cop, man. He's from New York. Right? He's got to use that colorful language. Sort of
sweet quirk there. Yeah, he's a real cop, isn't he? He's more cop than FBI almost. So yeah, I think there's a real imbalance though, because Scully just doesn't seem to react to any of it. And I guess my question would be, why are Doggett and Scully even here? Like, why are they even investigating this? It's just happened. Is it an X-File? Does anybody think it's an X-File? Like, I mean, they do now because they've discovered. But when they get there, they don't know that, this.
Usually by the time they're called in, they've exhausted, the local PD has exhausted all of their avenues. And they're like, yeah, we just don't know. We don't know what it could be.
Yeah, this is a loophole here that needs to be exposed by fan fiction, right? Somebody needs to say, Doggett and Scully were on their way to some FBI conference. And on their way there, the local PD were like, hey, we've got this really weird car. And they were like, okay, let's just skip the conference. And do you know what I mean? There's got to be some other reason. Like,
this episode is not worth it for fanfic, for, the missing scene right there.
And he's like, stop trying to make it make sense.
There are a couple other things that don't make sense to me in this episode, but we'll get there soon.
Yeah, definitely. So Scully is doing an autopsy. She just finished an autopsy, and she says that the crash didn't kill Kurt. He was pulled face first through the windscreen. And she says the words, like a bowling ball, like a bowling ball.
Yes.
A mental image that none of us needed, but effective.
It does look like that. Once she said it, I was like, yeah, that does look like a bowling ball.
Yeah. And Doggett is like, what? Incredulous, but, he trusts Scully. He does say that's humanly impossible. And then Scully, so it's a little bit of sass, says, certainly for any ordinary man.
Isn't this the second time that she said it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Scully, in the first part says, no ordinary man could have done it. So this is a callback to that.
Yeah.
Is it a callback?
Yeah.
If it just happened 2 minutes ago.
It's a repetition. Lazy script writing, maybe. Yeah. I thought it was effective, the idea that, like, it's a creepy idea that this guy would, like, smash through the windscreen, grab this guy by the face, and then, like, with the power of the strength of his fingers, just, like, lift him out by the head through the windscreen. I mean, that's horrible. And maybe one could argue that might have made the, episode more exciting if we'd seen that. I mean, not that I necessarily want to see that much violence, but anyway. So Doggett says he's found a print and fresh blood from the windscreen. He's like, I managed to reconstruct the windscreen. And I'm like, oh, bless you, Doggett, doing CSI.
Good old-fashioned detective work right there.
Yeah. And it matches Ray Pierce's blood. Like, it matches Ray Pierce's DNA. And that's Nora's husband. So just in case anyone's forgotten. And he's just can't believe it, really. And Scully's like, my theory is going to come true because women are always right. So far, how are you feeling about this episode? let's check in.
It's okay. Nothing spectacular has really happened. Like you said, Scully's a little, I don't know if you said sleepy, but I think she's a little sleepy. She's a little bored. Doggett's doing all right. He's doing his detective work, and, he's playing the skeptic to Scully's believer. It's okay. Run of the mill. Nothing to really grab you.
What do you think of a man that is so strong that he can like withstand the concept of like a metallic man. I mean,
yeah, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Because if he's nice and safe and benevolent, then wonderful. But if he's going out killing people, how do you stop a man like that?
Yeah.
So that is a terrifying idea.
And they do exploit that later on in the episode, don't they? So meanwhile, in a halfway house, I guess on the other side of town, Ray is asleep in a bed with his injured hand, and it does show his injured hand. So of course, like this is proving that like Scully's theory about what he's done is actually true. He wakes up to see some blood on the pillow beside him, and he goes into the bathroom and gets out a nail clipper. And you're like, what are you going to do with that really big, rusty-looking nail clipper? And he proceeds to use the nail clipper to cut metal sticks from out of his face. So basically, the stubble that is growing out of his face is metal. And I thought that was quite effective. I thought it was a good scene.
That was cool.
And I'm just sort of sad that it didn't go any further, and that like, although he turns kind of into a metallic man over the course of the episode, that we didn't get to see him with a full metal beard. And I mean, I want like a metal beard. I want a mustache. I want metal sideburns. I want him to be...
It's so prickly. I can't even imagine.
I want him to be like a metallic Santa Claus is what I want.
That's terrible.
That's what I'm waiting for. And like big metallic bushy eyebrows.
No. This is a different episode, Clara. I don't think that's where this...
He can step out into the sun, and then it can just, the sun can reflect off his metallic beard, and he can just be this like bright, shining, anyway, glaring bearded man. But it never goes there. He clips off the metal bit sticking out of his cheek, and we move on to the next scene. So Dogger goes to visit Nora, and Nora's in the company of yet another man who is Ray and Kurt's boss, who's called Larry. Larry.
Larry. Okay, good.
Larry.
I'm glad you knew that. Someone had to.
So many American names. Well, Larry, I guess you could call somebody Larry in the UK, but these are real like American middle-aged men names. Ray, Kurt, and Larry. So Ray and Kurt used to work at a salvage yard, and Larry's the owner or the manager in charge of the salvage yard. And he sort of says, I'm visiting Nora, and Nora's a little hostile towards Dogger, I thought. So some people have said, I've read online, that they really didn't like this actress's acting. Nora is played by Jennifer Parsons. And some people have said that they think her acting is pretty bad. What do you think? Like, it's over the top.
Not in relation to the other guest actors in this episode. There are some lines delivered by, is it Larry or Harry? I thought it was Harry. Am I correct?
It may actually be Harry, but I thought it was Larry.
Okay.
Does it matter? Doesn't matter. Harry's
Mr. Odell. I do know his last name is
yeah.
Odell. I have that.
Let's address him with respect.
Because we're not sure what his first name is. There are some lines that the owner, Odell, of the Southside Salvage, some lines that he delivers that I just don't buy them. It's not like a human being delivering these lines. It's not, I don't know. It's very comic booky. And I know you had said that earlier, but it just, the dialogue isn't working for me. So I don't know that it's necessarily her fault. Was it cast and crew that said that they weren't happy with Jennifer's?
No, it's like people, it's like viewers. It's viewers. It's people on like IMDb and people who've written.
I felt that way about everyone.
I don't think
pick on the poor woman.
I don't think anyone professionally involved in this episode has said like anything bad about it. I think they've all been kind of quiet or nice. I mean, I don't think anyone's really thinking about it, like except for people who are watching the episode.
Literally, no one is thinking about Salvage.
Except us.
Except us.
If you're listening to this podcast, you are too now.
Congratulations.
We've brought you along for the ride. Yeah, Nora's a little hostile towards Dogger, and I couldn't really figure out the reason why, but she's stressed. Like, the man that she was with last night has just been killed. Her husband's died. I don't know.
Sure.
I
I'd buy that.
You know, she's a widow. She's a new widow.
Yeah.
Doggett learns that Ray was never cremated like he was supposed to have been. And Nora's like, but they gave me ashes. Like, I don't understand. Like,
really curious what she got instead of her husband's ashes.
Yeah, so
they never addressed that.
They never addressed this. And they also don't address it like as if it was covered up or something. Like,
No.
Are we supposed to think that Larry, Harry, Mr. Odell, whatever his name is, and Curtis, like, were covering up the fact that, you know, I mean, none of this is clearly explained, but
then, like, what happened to the body? Whose body was cremated instead? Did they go in there and steal the body? Like, there are so many questions from just this one scene.
Yeah, or is it even like that the funeral home thought they lost the body and didn't want to own up to it? So they just gave it ashes of, like, I don't know, empty wooden casket and a dog or something. Do you know what I mean? We don't know.
Was his metal not strong enough yet that they were able to cremate the body, but it came back together? But then whose ashes did she get in the end? Because she did say that. Oh, are you writing a fanfic about it now?
No, I mean, what would be amazing would be if they melted him down into ashes, like they basically cremated him, gave her an urn, and then he kind of came back together with the urn. She put the urn on, like, the mantelpiece of her house with a memorial picture of him and, like, flowers and candles. And then she went to bed and then woke up the next morning, was making herself a cup of coffee, looked across. She's got an open plan kitchen in the living room, and she looked across the living room at the urn on the mantelpiece, and he suddenly burst out of the he, like,
are you sure you're not writing fanfic?
And he was like, baby,
I'm back.
I'm back. Terminator. And she starts screaming and has, like, a psychotic episode, or, like, has shock, freaks out because, you know, anyway, I mean, if he'd burst out of his own urn, that would have been a story. Burst out of his own
then
coffin,
she calls
even.
Mulder and Scully, or I'm sorry, Doggett.
Yeah, and then Mulder
Scully.
comes back because
That'd
like,
be great.
I've got to return from wherever I am. I can't even remember where Mulder is at this point, because this is such an amazing X-File that no one's ever burst out of an urn before, fully covered in metal with a giant metal beard. the metal Santa Claus.
Please stay tuned for Clara's fanfic.
Anyway, for Patrons only.
Oh, obviously.
So Ray was never cremated like he was supposed to have been, and Doggett learns that he's supposed to have died from Gulf War syndrome. And Nora can't possibly believe that Ray is still alive. She, like, talks about how she watched him die, which is kind of sad. Like,
yeah,
you know, she fed him, she nursed him, he couldn't lift his head towards the end, all that sort of stuff, which is really awful. And Ray's boss, and also Doggett says, you know, we think he was involved in the death of Curtis. And Ray's boss says that this is impossible. Like, he was never a violent man. I've known him for years, and he was a wonderful, wonderful person. So, you know, mystery right there. Meanwhile, Ray is eating a sandwich at the halfway house. And it was kind of crunchy sandwich. I was like, oh, is that a hot toasted sandwich?
Well, also he's chewing on the aluminum foil. So.
He's chewing on the aluminum foil, yeah. So then I was sort of like, I mean, I think that's a little in joke that you know, that he's kind of not noticing it's metal because his mouth is already made of metal. Anyway,
my teeth hurt from watching him do that.
Yeah, it's like a horrible idea, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm wondering, at this point, are we supposed to be thinking he's mentally different because he is now starting to become this metal man? And this is a theme that I think kind of enters in at this point and then just keeps going throughout the episode. And it actually, I think, confuses things and makes things more discombobulated in the whole episode about whether or not Ray is, like, psychologically becoming someone different, or he is someone different, or he's, like, lost his empathy, lost his sense of like morality or whatever, and it's never really properly addressed. And then there's also the whole aspect of, like, if he's not really a human anymore and he hasn't really got any sort of level of empathy, do we even care about him? And if we don't care about him, like, why are we watching this TV show? Why are we watching this episode? And then if we have to look at that, then we have to say, you know, maybe we should have a word with Sarah Blair. No, I'm joking. Not the ex-cast. Sarah! No.
Sarah and I have already had words about this season. Kind words, but words.
Kind words. So he's silent and unfriendly, and he's approached by a volunteer at the actual halfway house who's named Lorena? Clarissa? Lorena,
yeah.
Lorena. And
she seems very nice.
Yeah, she's quite sweet, yeah. And she's trying to be friendly, and he's just like eating a sandwich, not really making eye contact with her.
Could not care less.
But also could legitimately, at a halfway house, could legitimately be seen as somebody who's suffering from trauma.
Sure.
Or is sort of shut down emotionally because they are coming off drugs or whatever, like, you know, or are mentally ill. Like, basically, it's not impossible that Lorena could think that this man might need support and help, not that he's becoming this metallic monster murderer. And so she says, you know, can I do anything for you? Can I help? Like, she implies that she's had a hard past, a difficult past, and that she can help him. And he says, you can leave me alone.
Yeah. She's really reaching out to him. I felt bad for her.
And that's the first line of dialogue that he's said ever in the episode so far. And she's like, all righty then. I'm going to leave. I'm out of here.
Can I just say about Lorena? She is so late 90s, early 2000s with her hair and her top and the colors that she wears. And I'm not saying this in a bad way, but you see her and it puts me in a time and place. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember being there.
Like, we've just with the plaits in her hair.
That, and like the way it's, you know, she has like some strands coming down. And it's just it's of that time. And not in a bad way.
Yeah. It kind of it places the episode in a specific time as well.
It does. It does.
So then we go to the salvage yard where Ray used to work. And we see Harry, Larry, Mr. whatever his name is.
Mr. Odell, I believe.
Mr. Odell. I almost called him O'Neill. We see him spraying over some barrels, some blue barrels. He's spraying over like what we assume is some writing on those barrels. And then he walks into the office of the salvage yard. And I think the salvage yard is really well lit. These like mountains of sort of discarded cars and bits of metal. It's spooky, you know.
And also now knowing that he's covering something up, his strange acting, and I mean acting by the character, but also acting by the actor in the previous scene that he was in, kind of makes more sense. If you're worried about something, you need to cover something up. All right, maybe you're not acting like yourself. So that does kind of put his acting into perspective. But anyway, just, I don't know if I'm making excuses, but, you know, looking for things to like here.
And also it kind of makes a bit more sense that he's hanging around Nora.
Sure.
As well, because maybe he feels a sense of responsibility or guilt or something. So he goes into the office and he starts shredding some paperwork suspiciously. And you know, whenever you see anybody shred anything in a movie or a film, you know, they're covering up shit.
I just want to know, why wasn't this done a week ago or while the guy was sick? Why do we have to cover it up now? Isn't that a bad time to do it? I don't know. Like, why wait until things go south?
I mean, so you're like kind of annoyed that this guy isn't a good enough like pre-planner, like a plan. Like this guy had a contingency plan.
I'm not annoyed, but it's just like, you're not a capable bad guy if you're doing it this way. Cover your tracks beforehand. Anyway.
So that is a good point, though. That actually does lead on to, well, something I did want to talk about at some point, like about how there isn't really a villain in this particular episode. And that is also a problem, I think, because you kind of don't know who you're supposed to be rooting for. You also kind of don't know who's supposed to be condemned. And then it all makes the whole episode seem a little bit like it just lacks intensity and sort of like emotion. For like you don't have the emotion to be invested in things because you don't really know like who you should care about. Do you know what I mean? You don't care about anybody.
Yeah. I will say that the villain is negligence here, because no one, I guess we'll get more into detail, but no one really did anything on purpose. It was all, oh, it's a big mistake. Oops.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to. So I do agree with you there. And maybe they're acting a bit morally ambiguous now that there is someone who's died. But yeah, no one to really root for or be against. I guess I kind of root for Nora. I feel bad for her. She's gone through some stuff.
Yeah, I guess yeah. Yeah. I mean, Nora doesn't deserve anything that happens to her.
No.
And neither does
Lorena. So
suddenly, so there he is, like
shredding away.
Shredding. I just did a little figure shredding.
They can't see you, there. Clara.
He's shredding away, and then suddenly Ray is there. Boom. Standing there right in the doorway of the office, and Harry starts talking to Ray and trying to like sort of reason with him. Ray's not saying anything. Ray's just getting closer and closer. And as Harry is talking, we know that he's reaching for a gun because we see him reach for a gun, and he pulls out a shotgun from underneath the desk and shoots Ray in the chest. And Ray goes very dramatically flying through the window, right? So here's the first problem. Big first problem.
But can we say the line that Mr. Odell says?
Yes, do.
This time you stay dead. Which is a terrible line.
Which makes him sound like he wanted him dead. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which he didn't.
Yeah.
We all know he didn't. It was just like an accident. But anyway, this time you stay dead, and pulls out a giant shotgun.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is the first problem here is problem number one is how is it that a car doesn't stop Ray, but a shotgun does? You know, it's like a car can barrel into me and I'll just be fine and stand there.
Sure.
But and not even really be injured. But a bullet. I guess the bullet could be traveling more than 40 miles an hour. I don't know. Audience of the X-Cast, without revealing that you are an obsessive gun nut, maybe one of you could research this and tell us like how fast a shotgun bullet flies through the air. Anyway, either way.
And if it damages vital organs, if you get him in the right spot, I don't know.
Well,
maybe if you decapitate him.
I think shotguns are incredibly damaging. And the only reason I know this, well, not know this, but the only reason I think this is because I've played video games.
Oh, okay.
I live in the UK, people. I've never ever seen a shotgun. Okay, shotguns don't come. Well, I'm sure they are here somewhere, but like no one uses shotguns. Really, it's not legal. But in video games, I have used a shotgun, and it tends to kill people quicker than like a little revolver. But I think the situation about a shotgun is it doesn't the impact of the bullet hit you kind of like fragment in your body or something. That would explain why Ray and he's like, I don't know. Don't look at me. I ain't got no shotgun out there that I'm gonna.
I don't have. Yeah.
But like
we have water guns in our house, and that's about it. We call them blasters. We don't like to call them guns. So
what we do know is to impact the shotgun basically removes Ray's arm from his body.
So we know that Mr. Odell is a terrible shot because they were pretty close.
Yeah. Yeah. Just aim for his head. What's wrong with you?
Chest area. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Got his arm. All right.
So at this point, we are led to believe something happened to Ray or was done to Ray to make him different. And both Larry and Kurt knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
They may not necessarily have been involved, but they knew about it.
Well, at this point, I do assume that they're involved. I mean, if they're covering up evidence.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I would assume.
So Larry finds Ray's severed arm. And he looks at it and it's pretty gross. And it's severed arm. So it's like severed from the elbow. So basically what's lying there is the hand, the wrist, and the lower arm, and kind of cut off at the elbow. And then he's like looking at it horrified. And Ray's fingers start to move. And then we see that it starts growing like metal-like tendons. And this is probably the closest that we come to a direct callback to Terminator 2. Because this is basically what you see in Terminator 2, right? Which is that Robert Patrick's character, who is the T-1000 android, it gets destroyed in various scenes. And then the metal parts of his body all kind of liquidly kind of sort of attracted to each other almost magnetically. And they all kind of come together to reform his body. And that's kind of what you're starting to see here, right?
Mm-hmm. What do you think of the effect? Was it cool?
The problem is it is cool, but the problem is we've already seen it. We've seen it in a movie. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, it was such a new concept when it was done in Terminator 2, and it was introduced so strongly in Terminator 2 that whenever you see this kind of thing again in some other TV show, you're immediately going to be thinking about Terminator 2. So it feels more like a little homage, you know, than an actual genuine X-File moment to me, I think.
Okay.
Feels kind of heavy-handed. I know that may not have been what they were trying to do in that moment, but you can't help but associate it.
Oh, yeah.
You know how occasionally there's an episode in the X-Files where there's a real sort of spooky, creepy child, and you immediately think of The Omen. You know, sometimes the concepts are just too linked to something that's already been done before that it's kind of hard to. It takes you out of the moment of the X-Files, and you're like, "Hey, it's like the Terminator." And that's what you're thinking instead of thinking, "Wow, isn't this so?" Anyway, but maybe I'm wrong. You know, our listeners might have a different view. So then Ray pops out and claws off Larry's face.
Well, he bowling balls his face again, right?
Does he? I thought he just
Doesn't he?
I thought he just ripped his face off. Maybe he does bowling. Maybe he does bowling ball his face. We never see what happens to Larry stroke Harry O'Neill. We never see what happens to his face because then he's shown lying face down.
Right. I had assumed because he did that before that he would do it again. His
modus operandi is to bowling ball people's heads.
He's the bowling ball killer.
The bowling ball killer. So the next shot is face to black as like Larry, Harry. Oh, how little we knew you. All your name screams and dies. Does he even scream? I think he screams. Doggett finds so Doggett's at the crime scene in the next scene, and Doggett finds some blue paint on Larry's fingers. And I didn't know if it was blue paint or whether it was like he actually had metal in his blood that was making his nails appear blue, but I think it's supposed to be paint.
I think it's the spray paint because
spray paint. Okay.
He had been spray painting. He disposed of the can and then he got killed. No time to wash your hands. So that's what I think it was.
And blue paint in the X-Files always makes me think of cerulean blue. And that just makes me think of better episodes than this one.
Well, basically, if you're painted in cerulean blue, you're pretty much a dead man or woman or they, them person.
And so I just immediately makes me think of a better episode and makes me think, I really wish I was watching that one instead of this.
That's interesting. I didn't think of that. That's really interesting.
Okay. So Doggett is now starting to think Ray is actually committing these crimes, but he just can't figure out how. Oh, Doggett. Bless you, baby. I love Doggett.
He will learn. Yeah, he's a good guy. I like Doggett.
He's a good guy. And he calls up Scully on the phone. Oh, no, does he though? Or is he with her?
No, he calls her and she's with the other body.
Oh, yeah.
And asks if that body of, oh God, I've already forgot. Kurt, if he has blue on his hands or nails, and she checks and he doesn't. And she asks, well, is that important? And Doggett goes, I'm not sure yet.
And he talks about
kind of catalog that in his brain, like, okay, pay attention for the blue, which it never comes back into play, but okay. Well, actually it does. Never mind.
Yeah, it does.
At the very, very
briefly.
end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he talks about like what he says is this guy was shot like point blank with a shotgun and then got up and then killed this man. And he doesn't understand how a human being could do that. Like he'd be too injured. He basically said there's blood everywhere. The loss of blood must be so extreme that you couldn't get up afterwards and, you know, physically overwhelm another person. But he does talk about soldiers fighting through the pain of injuries during war. And I thought that was kind of a small little poignant moment there, kind of showing that Doggett's also a veteran. And Doggett himself has seen war and seen serious injury during war. And I think that does come into play a little bit later when he talks about Ray's background and sort of sounds quite sympathetic towards him. And I think more of that could have been made in the episode, like Doggett feeling a connection to the main protagonist, if Ray is a protagonist, because, you know, of their shared military experience, but they don't do that. But anyway.
Missed opportunity.
So Scully and Doggett shelve the how this happened in order to look for the why. So Scully, rightly so, says, well, we don't know how, but why would somebody kill these people? And I was like, thank you, Scully, because we're also wondering that. And Doggett starts looking at the shredded paper in the office, and I was like, good detective work, mate.
He's good.
He's good. Which is an invoice for Chamber Technologies. And we all know that sounds like a dodgy corporate lab company. So at this point in the episode, how are you feeling, Annie? I mean, what are your thoughts so far?
Underwhelmed, I guess. I don't know if I have a lot of thoughts. Is that bad? I feel like I should have a lot of thoughts about this. We're on a podcast discussing it, and I'm waiting to see if, God, I was going to say Mulder and Scully, if Doggett and Scully are going to figure it out and how they're going to catch Ray, who Ray is going to kill next. But I don't know if I have a lot of deeper thoughts in relation to this.
I mean, it's a lot of waiting, isn't it? That's why
it's a lot of wait. Yes, that's a really good way of putting it. There's a lot of waiting, and they're not that they're not being proactive, but they're definitely a few steps behind us.
Yeah. And so we're kind of waiting for. I felt like we're waiting for these two people to catch up, and if
for Ray to kill more people.
Or for Ray to kill more people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And then, leading on from that, the next scene we see is Ray washing the blood off his hands at the halfway house, and his skin is peeled off, in certain areas, obviously from the shotgun and everything, to reveal metal. So now he's starting to look more like a metal man. It's like he's kind of half metal, half human.
That's his skin peeling off.
I mean, I assumed
it looked like jagged metal to me, and I couldn't quite understand, but that makes a lot of sense.
Or it's like more of his actual human tissue's been kind of damaged, so that the metal's kind of coming through. I felt like the metal was actually damaged too. Do you know what I mean? I think he has been damaged. Like you said, it looked like scrappy kind of metal bits. In a typical scene of the X-Files, a well-meaning landlord, landlady, volunteer, nurse, doctor, anybody, right, who just happens to be in the same place as the protagonist stroke monster stroke murder. We've seen so many scenes like this in the X-Files, just well-meaning, or not even well-meaning, sometimes nosy people going into a room when they shouldn't go into a room, and they're going to die.
Yep.
Although she doesn't die in this scene, but Lorena comes in to check on Ray, and if I was Ray, I would have locked the door, but never mind. So it's a standard scene in the X-Files. Nosy, curious, overly helpful person walks into the monster's den, and she sees the bloody clothes, but she's coming to check if he's okay because somebody saw him coming to the halfway house with blood on him, and she sees the bloody clothes and she tries to help, and he turns around with his ruined face. I think he's wearing a hoodie, and he turns around with a ruined face and tells her to get out. And I feel at this stage he's becoming even more robotic. He's shows no emotion, no interest in talking to her, no interest in even covering up the blood on the clothes on the bed, no interest in even sort of coming up with an explanation. He's just like, get out.
I mean, I guess if you were indestructible, would you be worried?
No, you're right. Actually, that's a good point.
What are they going to do to you? A car won't stop you. A shotgun won't stop you.
Yeah, and knowing how strong you are, you could just hit her and kill her, which
pretty much
does later on. I'm kind of confused about lots of stuff at this point, like what Ray's motivations are. Should we care about him? He's basically a robot. Do I care about an unempathic, unemotional robot? But I also don't care. And that's part of the problem.
But you do care that he doesn't kill more people, especially nice people. Nora, Lorena, you don't want them to die. We don't know what these other people have done. The people who have already died, we don't know. Maybe they did do something bad. At this point, it hasn't really been revealed. So
yeah, I did feel at this point, I thought, okay, he's going to come into contact with his wife again. There's no reason why Nora would still be in the episode if she wasn't going to be speaking to him later. And I didn't really want him to kill his wife. And I thought that was a real possibility if he's so robotic,
Right.
So then we're at Chamber Industries Technologies. Chamber Industries Technologies. They're basically the company which has a bunch of labs in it. And we have a doctor, Dr. Tom Puvogel, who's played
something
by
like that.
Ara Gross, Aragros. I don't know how to say his name, but this guy is really well known. He's one of those actors which you recognize because you see his face. He's been in everything under the sun, like everything under the sun. Like, he's been in the X-Files. He's been in, everything, like Law and Order. He's just one of those guys that you see on TV all the time, playing like an actor, playing like a doctor, playing a scientist, playing a criminal, playing like he's a character actor.
Mm-hmm.
So he's very recognizable, a very familiar face, and he does a good job in this role. I think he's okay in this in this particular, like, he's got a very small part, and he's explaining to Doggett about what they do at this particular company, about smart metals. He calls them smart metals, which actually is a real thing. I realize smart metals are actually not the way that they're describing it. Some of this is science fiction, but like metals that have and different types of alloys and the strength of different alloys and stuff. You know,
I didn't know that.
Scientists are working on stuff like that. So they're working on devising indestructible metals for cars and equipment that will be able to repair themselves. So the idea is to eventually make objects that can repair themselves and are kind of indestructible, and alloys with molecular. I actually do speak English, contrary to popular belief. Molecular memories. And the scientist says this is not a reality. So Doggett's asking about it as if it's a reality. And the scientist says, this is all theoretical. Like, we don't actually produce or make anything here, which we all know is a lie.
Obviously
a lie. And at this point, my mind immediately thought to myself, what would you make if you had smart metal? And this is the question I'm going to ask you, Annie. What would you make if you had smart metal? Like what thing would you want to not be just like destructible?
My
Anything.
heart.
Oh, like a.
I don't know.
It kind of makes me sad, man.
It's broken. No. What would I want? Not destructible. I'm not very imaginative. I mean, I guess my house, we have a lot of giant trees in our yard that I'm always like, is this tree going to fall on my roof? Like, am I going to wake up to that one stormy winter night? A car?
I guess a roof would make sense. Like if a tree fell on your roof and then it like made a little hole or a big hole in your roof, that then the metal in the roof could just kind of like knit itself back together without you even really having to do anything.
So nice. Rather than changing your roof every 20 years. Oh my gosh.
So I was thinking of iPhone screen. So if you just dropped your iPhone, it cracked, and then you just picked it up and the crack just mended itself. That would be cool.
$1 idea right there, because everyone has a cracked iPhone screen.
Yep. I've patented it right now. This is me. Laying copyright right now in verbal form. But yeah, I immediately started thinking of all the objects. And I also thought about indestructible metals would be quite cool if, building buildings like in earthquake zones and stuff. Although you often want buildings in earthquake zones to be flexible, don't you?
You want them to be able to sway a little bit. Yeah.
But anyway, they don't really talk about that in this episode. So that was just me digressing there. So Dr. David Clifford, who was originally working on this project, and Clifton. Let's say Clifford.
Clifton.
This is a bit later on the episode where Doggett says Dr. Clifton, and then he goes Dr. David Clifton. And I'm like, wow, we must not forget his first name was David. I don't know why Doggett pronounces or enunciates that. I don't know. Anyway, but so Dr. David Clifton was the name that was found on the invoice that was being shredded at the salvage yard. And Doggett someone mentions him and says, does he work on this project? And he had worked on the project before. And Dr. Puvogel, who I want to call Tom, or on a first name basis, says that Dr. Clifton is no longer at the company, which we all know means he's dead. Or he's made of metal, and that's him, like in the wall right there. Like he's a trash can right now. So Dr. Puvogel says, I've taken over all his work. And he's quite clear with Doggett that they're not using physical materials, that this is all theoretical, and any physical materials that the company does use, they don't dispose of in salvage yards in the city. They dispose of them in some special place.
Designated site or something.
Designated site, yeah.
Something like that.
So Doggett calls Scully.
Hold on, can I just say something really fast about that scene? Dr. Puvogel, is that how you say his name?
So I think it is. It's a German name, but he's like, it doesn't have a CH. And I'm like, okay.
Right. Well, it says no H. And it reminds me of the Eddie Van Blunt joke, BLUNDHT. He makes it a point to say that there is an H. I don't know if I'm looking too much into it. I don't know if it's a callback to that.
Or it could be that somebody...
Puvogel, no H.
It could be that somebody like works on the X-Files whose name is constantly being mispronounced, who has an H in his name. And it's like a running joke, you know?
Well, I know that the Eddie Van Blunt joke was written about David Duchovny because he's always Duchovny. Nobody ever used to put the H in his name. So he would say Duchovny with an H. Anyway, I don't know if I'm looking too much into it.
But his name is not pronounced Duchovny, is it? So he'd be like, it's a silent H? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah, I think so. So
Duchovny.
So Doggett calls Scully and tells her about the smart metals. And this is a really weird scene because I think obviously people's voices sound different over the phone than they do when they're standing beside you. Mm-hmm. But his voice sounds so different on the phone in the scenes with Scully that I do not believe it's the same phone call. And he's like, hey, it's Doggett.
Well, I think he had a cold in this episode, right?
Oh, did he? Okay, well, that would explain it. I don't know.
He sounded nasally to me.
That would explain it.
I thought he sounded very different as well. And yeah.
I was like, I don't believe the same man on the phone is the same man that we're seeing talking on the phone in the other scene. They just sound different. And he was sort of quite sultry. He was like, smart metals.
I don't know if I remember that.
So they have a conversation about it. He tells her all the information. He updates her. Scully has meanwhile checked Ray's medical records from before he died, from the hospital he was in. She says from the Veterans Hospital, and discovered that he did not die from Gulf War syndrome, but from exposure to some sort of metal contaminant.
Non-identifiable contaminant. Metal, yeah.
Which means it is kind of identifiable because it's metal, dude. But anyway, at this point, yet again, I feel like the audience know more than Doggett and Scully, and like we're watching two people slowly catch up talking on the phone about it. I was like, move the plot along, please. Anyway. And then comes the most memorable quote of the episode. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And it's rather heavy-handed. But I'm going to read it out anyway, because I think everybody's going to want to know the quote. I'm not going to attempt an American accent, because that would just be offensive. But John Doggett says, what are you saying? That Ray Pierce has become some sort of metal man? Because that only happens in movies. In the movies, Agent Scully. And Dana Scully says, does it, Agent Doggett? And you can see why I never had a career in acting. And
I wrote down the exact same quote. So if you weren't going to read it, I was. You
probably would do a better job than me. I should probably have let you do it. Or one of us could have been Scully. And one of us could have been Doggett.
Yeah.
Oh, well. That ship has sailed. But yeah, I feel that's quite heavy-handed referencing to Terminator 2. So when you heard this quote, were you like, or were you like, oh my God?
A little of both. It was, very cute. You're referencing that. I get it. But also the way it was delivered, it's a lot of it is the delivery for me in this. It's not necessarily the dialogue. Maybe it is the dialogue and I just don't know what I'm talking about, but you didn't have to say it like that, Gillian Anderson. I don't know. Just,
it's like
it's a joke and they know it's a joke and we're all in on the joke and that makes it less cute.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not.
What did you think? You?
Well, I feel like it's like she phoned it in and she literally did phone it in because they're on the phone. She phoned in being on the phone. Anyway. Yeah, I was like, oh God, I rolled my eyes. Back to the halfway house and Lorena is reading the newspaper. I feel like Lorena is the real detective of this episode. And she's
moving things along.
She's moving things along. She's moving the narrative along. And she sees Ray's obituary in the newspaper. And with the obituary is obviously the picture of him. So she recognizes him. As well as a news report on the TV about the death at the salvage yard. And I don't know if she's placing two and two together. But she definitely knows that Ray's alive and that he is supposed to be dead, but he's alive. And so she then goes to make a call to the address, Ray's address, to call Nora.
On the payphone. I just want to point that out. It's a payphone because those don't exist anymore, people.
They don't. It's true, they don't. And also calling up an operator and telling the operator like an address and a name. I mean, could you do that even anymore? I don't know if you can do that.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I would just Google something if I needed to find it out. Do they even have operators like that?
See, I don't think they do. So
yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know.
That puts this episode firmly in historical period.
It does.
Also, call the police. Why are you calling his wife?
Well, because she did say earlier, I know that involving the police doesn't help anyone.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
So she's had a rough life, and she knows that she doesn't want to make his life harder. She doesn't want to make his life worse. She just wants to help the guy, and maybe his wife is looking for him, and he's right here.
That's true. Actually, that's a good point. I forgot that she said that calling the police doesn't do any good. That would explain why she doesn't. So,
possibly mistrusting of the police. I don't know.
Yeah, and the police. I mean, we need police in life, I guess, I suppose. But a lot of people don't have good experiences with the police, right? Especially if they've had, they're living in halfway houses or they've been homeless or something. So they can be naturally suspicious of people in authority positions. So Scully and Doggett meet in a car, and Doggett says, "I'm sorry, I'm late," and I'm like, "How late are you, Doggett?" I would take about 10 minutes, 5 minutes, an hour. I need to know. But anyway, and what were you doing?
It's not like Scully was pacing around. Oh, where is this guy?
She says that's okay.
Yeah.
She's not bothered.
It was a strange line to just put in.
It's like, what? Scully confirms that Ray had enough metal in his blood to kill him. But Doggett is like, he's still a man. He's going to act and think like one. And I'm like, is he though? And is that what he's doing? He's not acting like a man, actually. I don't think. He's acting like a machine. And is the metal supposed to be making him into a machine? I mean, we don't know.
It's not really explained.
Yeah. So then they discuss the character of Ray. And this is a nice little bit here, which I quite liked, where Doggett talks about his background. He's found some information about Ray. He's researched him, and he's like, he came out of the army and he was an addict, and he was like addicted to drugs, and he cleaned himself up, and then married his wife, and he's very non-violent and held on a job, and Doggett's quite sympathetic. So he says, this is a man to root for. And he says, I've arrested enough killers, and he says something like dollars for donuts. They're all just whatever it is. They're all the same or something. And I'm like, Doggett, this is why I love you. This is why I love you, man. And I kind of just wish we had more stuff like that in the episode, like just more like funny phrases from Doggett. More like Doggett talking about how he feels about Clarissa, all about the feels. But Doggett,
all about the feels.
Doggett talking about how he feels about the killer or about his veteran past or whatever. But we don't get that, so whatever.
It's very fleeting.
And he says this is a man you can root for. But the main problem is we don't root for Ray because we're not getting any of that. And if they put more humanity in Ray, at least at some point, even at the beginning of the episode, and he becomes more machine-like as this episode goes on, I think we would have felt something. What we're getting is we're rooting for Nora or Lorena or anybody else really. So that is a problem, is that we're not getting this sort of man who's overcome adversity and is now tragedy befallen him again or something.
You really just get a bit of humanity at the end. And by then I think it's too late. He's already killed all these people, including, I say what you will about Mr. Odell and Kurt, but Lorena was innocent. She was trying to help him. And I don't know.
And also the deaths are horrible. The deaths are horrible.
Oh yeah.
I mean, even if you'd done something
gruesome,
bad, no one should have to die like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just not.
Yeah.
So then this comes to the question of who is the villain of the piece, and this is something that they sort of lightly touch on at some point in the episode. Is it the corporation who are producing this alloy or this metal? Is it the doctor who's withholding information from Doggett? Is it the doctor who's now no longer at the corporation and who was doing the project in the first place and all the experimentation? Is it the two guys that Ray worked with? Is it, as we go on to learn, an accountant? Like, is it Ray himself? Like, I guess the point of the episode is that there isn't really anyone to blame. Like you said, it's negligence. But the problem is, I just feel like that takes all the emotion out of the episode for the viewer.
Yeah. It's hard to root for anyone, again, besides Nora or Lorena. It's not nuanced enough to be interesting. So what do you have left?
And if you don't have anyone to condemn or anyone to root for, really, then yeah, you don't have any stake in the any skin in the game. I hate that phrase. But anyway, so Scully points out that even if they find Ray, like, they're not going to be able to physically stop him. And that is a good point. And I feel like it was high time that was made, because I was wondering, like, how are they going to even contain this guy, if they find him? So back at Chamber Industries, Dr. Puvogel is working late alone. And this is just a sign that you should never, ever work late, ever. Don't do that, guys. Work-life balance, it matters. And you could save your life if a metal man is coming after you.
Wise words.
In comes Ray, and he walks into the lab area where there are blue barrels looking a lot like the blue barrels that are back at the Salvage place. And he's looking for Puvogel. At this point, why he's looking for Puvogel, we don't know, because Puvogel isn't the doctor who was actually the one who made this whole experiment. Anyway, Puvogel's hiding, and then boom, boom, boom. It's a trap, we discover, because Ray walks into like a hot little lab chamber thing that has like a steel or a big reinforced door, and it shuts behind him, and a SWAT team run in, and so are Doggett and Scully. They're also there, and they start aiming their guns, and they start saying stuff like, will the door withstand his force? Is he locked? Is he contained? Dr. Puvogel is kind of panicking, and it's like, I have control of the door. And I'm like, don't give control of the door to this panicked scientist.
He doesn't sound very sure of that, actually.
I got the key
It'll
right
hold,
here.
I think.
I thought this was quite a good scene, like with everybody pointing their guns at the door, and then hearing the banging behind the door, which is obviously Ray trying to get out. And it's a 4-inch door. They make the point of saying it's a 4-inch door. And Scully and Doggett, are very much part of the action, and they're there. And then they hear this kind of like crash or whatever, and they open the door, and they find that Ray has punched his way through the metal and the concrete of the wall into the street outside of the building. And they find Ray's blood turning into metal on the opening of the wall, like it's his blood is turning into metal. So what did you think of this scene?
I thought it was pretty cool. I immediately noticed the lighting. There's some blue lighting, and you kind of see it as people are walking in through a door. Is it Ray himself, or is it the SWAT? I can't remember now. But either way, they have this really cool blue lighting. And then Ray walks into this chamber that's lit red right before the door is closed. So I thought that was really cool. There's lots of action. Things are happening. It's very tense. Is he going to break through the door? I have questions, though. How did they lure him here? How did they know that he was going to come? Are they just sitting around waiting for him to come? So they never explain that, which, okay, fine, whatever. Somehow they get him there. Also, how lucky for Ray that the chamber that's supposed to be so thick and contained is at a wall to the outside. It's not like some deep chamber within the company, the structure, the building, deep in the basement. It's just like, oh yeah, it's right over there in that corner, and he can just leave because that's a wall to the outside. So, and that was a little bit of a coincidence. But otherwise, I thought it was really cool, and specifically the lighting. The lighting added a lot to the mood of the scene.
Yeah, I thought that the chamber was going to be like hot or something, and they were going to like melt him or something.
Oh, that would have been good.
Because it was red. I don't know why. I just thought it was like a little hot room. But you're right. The fact that it has a wall that basically leads straight to the outside.
Yeah.
Like a contained room, which I assume they would be putting metals in there that need to be contained for, like, because of elements like force or something, you know,
Mhm.
like you really wouldn't want the dividing wall to be the wall that leads directly to the street outside where there's like civilians and pedestrians and cars and maybe
Mhm.
I mean look when they look through the wall, it almost looks like there's houses on the other side of the street. Do you know what I mean? It's like so that seems a bit weird. So Ray returns to the halfway house to find Nora, his wife, sitting in his room because obviously Lorena's called Nora and Nora's arrived. And she's like, oh my God, it's true. And she wants to help him. She loves him.
She's very sweet.
Yeah, she's very sweet. And even if he's metal, she wants to help him. She's also not very freaked out. Like when he turns and looks at her, she's like, oh no, he goes and looks in the mirror in the bathroom, doesn't it? She's standing behind him and she's like, oh my God. But I mean, I really feel like this must be love because, you know, I mean, I think I'd be like, what happened to you? I'd be like screaming. I'd be like, oh, I mean, also, I wondered if you were in pain because I'd be like, let me get you a doctor or something. But maybe she even says that. I don't know. I feel like she's a little calm.
The shock of finding out that your husband is dead and then he's alive. So there's also maybe she's dealing with those emotions first. Okay, you're alive. This is something that we can deal with, this metal aspect of you. But you're alive, so that's good.
Yeah. I think she just at one point doesn't she say it's a miracle because he's alive, and he's like, this isn't a miracle, you know. He is very cold and abrupt, and just was like, you shouldn't have come. You can't help me. I need to get revenge on the people that did this to me. And that's when I was like, well, I think he's completely lost the aspect of him that was like human before because he's not showing any affection to his wife.
Also, I thought that she was going to help him at that point because she was so set on making the people pay for giving him Gulf War syndrome.
Yeah.
That now he's going to get her on his side to help get revenge for whatever happened to him.
Yeah, she's always been looking for someone to blame for the situation. So this kind of works for her, doesn't it, really? So Doggett goes back to the salvage yard and finds the same blue barrels because he sees the blue barrels at the Chamber Industries and he finds the same blue barrels at the salvage yard when he goes back there. And then he knocks one of them over because he sees it has like handprints on the sort of lid of the barrel. And I think he scratches off. He gets out his knife. Oh, handy little Doggett. Twice in this episode, he uses a little pen knife. I'm like, dude, you were a Boy Scout once upon a time. And he scratches off and he sees Chamber Industries written on it. And he sees the sort of handprints in the sort of lid of the barrel. So he kicks it over. And he walks really, really close to the alloy metal liquid thing that comes out of the barrel. And I'm like, Doggett, if you're not careful, Terminator 2 is going to have a rerun. Like, you're going to come back as a metal man.
X-File style.
He's like, let me go step right in this stuff. And I'm like, Doggett, get your feet away from it. And he looks in and he sees a dead man who looks like he's made entirely of metal. And it's Dr. Clifton. Da, da. And I knew it was Dr. Clifton.
Obviously.
And I think he says, oh my God. And I'm like, yes, someone has the proper reaction at the proper time in this episode at last. So Scully and Doggett question Dr. Puvogel. Turns out Dr. Clifton was dying because he got contaminated by the metal that he was working with. And they have him like wrapped in plastic, kind of like squished up in like shriveled like metal body. And he wanted to hide his death because he wanted the scientific work to continue. And Dr. Pavogel's like, he didn't have a family. The only thing that mattered to him was his work. And I'm like, oh, so sad, so grim. And yet again, this is a theme that we see in the X-Files again and again and again of irresponsible scientists.
Yeah.
Standard irresponsible scientific exploration.
I mean, to a certain extent, I get it, to the extent that, they're being negligible, but you want to push the boundaries of science and you want to be the first person to do it and get the recognition, but sometimes it costs your life.
I think when it starts becoming a public health hazard,
Sure.
I think you need to start owning up to it and getting the authorities involved.
Yeah.
I mean, like when it becomes an environmental catastrophe, you know, and this was a public health hazard because, you know,
Obviously. Yeah.
obviously this is what the whole episode, how it happened. So Nora suddenly appears at the labs. Doggett just happens to look through the glass of the room.
Look, there she is.
And he's like, what's she doing here?
What a coincidence.
What?
I will say that I really like the music in this scene. It's almost like a heartbeat thumping. Very effective.
Yeah, and actually, even in the most ridiculous X-Files episode, the music's almost always good.
Yeah.
And it kind of elevates the drama, doesn't it? Even if the writing isn't so great. So well done, Mark Snow.
Well done. We appreciate you, Mark Snow.
We appreciate you. We always appreciate you. Nora suddenly appears and she's going through the files in one of the offices of the labs, and she's about to use the phone. She picks up the phone, little landline, and Doggett and Scully come in and start questioning her, and they manage to find out where Ray is. And Nora basically says that she's trying to help him. You know, somebody did this to him, and she's trying to find out who they are. And they find out where Ray is because obviously Nora was calling Ray to give him a name of a person that she saw in the files. And at this point, I'm like, who could she possibly have seen in the files? Like, how many more people like are involved in this?
Right.
Anyway, policemen arrive at the shelter and they're outside, and you can hear the sirens and you can hear the policemen getting ready to go into the shelter to find him. And Lorena's in the shelter, and Ray basically kills her.
Yeah.
For no reason.
That was really
whatsoever.
sad.
And I almost wondered if he did it accidentally, because he's trying to keep it quiet, but his like strength is, he's so strong that doesn't he just kind of like basically bang her head into the wall? I think he basically kills her. He like crushes her skull basically.
Yeah. I thought he covered her mouth and nose so tight that she couldn't breathe, and eventually she died.
I think she dies too quick for that.
Yeah. Good point.
Not that we want to go into the details of how long it takes somebody to suffocate. But,
No.
But yeah. At this point, like we know that somehow Ray was, because Ray's not connected to the scientists and the research or anything. So we know it somehow at some point, Ray must have come into contact with this alloy. And so at this point, I was thinking like, it's accidental. I think like, is it a chemical spill or industrial accident? Like, they dumped this guy's body, they dumped Dr. Clifton's body at the salvage yard, and Ray somehow came into contact with the alloy and has ended up. So I think at this point, I kind of knew what happened, and I guess everything after this just felt like, I don't know, kind of unnecessary. I don't know. I mean, I guess you have to see Ray sort of holding his killer instincts. But anyway, so Lorena is dead. So that's really sad. And it kind of erases a lot of not a lot, any of the tiny shred of empathy or sympathy you might have had for Ray. Not that I had any, but if you did have sympathy for Ray, he's just killed an innocent woman.
It's gone.
Who's got nothing to do with the situation. And this isn't her fault. And he absconds.
Someone who was actually trying to help him.
Yeah, someone who was actually trying to help him, yeah. And he absconds from the shelter, so the police don't get him. They say he like jumped out of a second floor window or something. Scully and Mulder are talking to Nora. They're interviewing her, and Nora's always been looking for people to blame for the situation, as we said before. So she easily falls into this new form of blaming the company and the people who are working there. But in reality, there isn't anyone to blame. There isn't really any people to blame. Names of people that she can find. There isn't some corrupt CEO who's, willingly polluting the environment or something with this chemical or whatever. And Scully makes that clear. She's like, there is no one to blame. This is an accident. This was an accident. And Nora said,
and certainly not in not for a vigilante. I mean, if you want to bring charges against these people for negligence, for contamination, that's one thing. But to just go around killing people, I mean,
yeah,
it's not going to get you anywhere.
Like no one maliciously did anything
Right.
to make this happen. It just,
Right.
I guess you could say after the fact, there was some level of element of trying to cover it up. But so Nora is sent home with the police to keep an eye on her. And she goes in to the house and the police are outside and Ray's in the home. And I could have told you that was going to happen. I don't know why the police didn't. Maybe when they're protecting people, they don't follow them into their homes. But anyway, I was like, why did the police check out the house? But never mind.
Yeah, I had a problem with that as well. How quickly Ray was discovered in the house. And I'm like, seriously, you people aren't doing your job.
Yeah.
How did he get in here?
Well, this is the same police force that didn't find a body in a wheelie bin. So
That's
anyway.
true.
Anyway, but it's very good at maths and physics equations, apparently.
Well, you have to have some sort of expert come down and determine that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
She's threatened by Ray. And she tries to reason with him and he grabs her hand. She's like, you're not going to hurt me. Like, I know you're not going to hurt me. Like, you wouldn't do that to me. And he does start hurting her, which just goes to prove it's not the same man. And she refuses to give him any information. But then when she runs out to tell the police that he's in the house and they run in to try and catch him, she says that I did give him a name. In the end, I gave him a name because he obviously was hurting her and threatening her.
Sure.
And you know what? I don't really blame her. I mean, I think people do lots of stuff under duress, especially if it's like painful duress. And I don't think people should be blamed for that.
And she admitted to it. She told them the name so that they could go protect the guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think she realizes at that point this man isn't her husband anymore, and she's got to help the police. So who is Owen Harris? Owen Harris, someone we haven't heard of throughout the entire episode.
Surprise, new character.
Oh, is this a little bit late to be introducing a new character into the episode?
Probably.
Yeah, this was like a episode pacing mistake to me.
I don't know. Is it meant to be a surprise? Shocker, new character. He did it. I don't know. I don't know the purpose of this.
Yeah, I understand why we didn't hear about Owen before. But anyway, what do you think of how Ray looks at this point? Because by this point, he's like almost full on metal man.
Yeah, no, it's sad and pretty effective, I think, in terms of how he looks. But I feel for him to a certain degree because he was an innocent man who didn't deserve this. And he seemed to have been a really good guy, good husband. But once he became the metal man, he became the metal man. So, yeah.
Is he scary to you though? Is he scary in a scary?
He's pretty scary. If someone walked up to me looking like that, sure, I'd be scared.
I guess
he almost looks like charred flesh to me. I don't know what it is.
Barbecue meat.
It really does remind me of that more than metal. But either way, it's not easy to look at.
So I've had a slightly different reaction. I felt like he reminded me he reminds me like he's from a character of like the Fantastic Four or something.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what I mean? He just looks a little bit like there is a Fantastic Four character who is kind of like mottled like that. And it just seemed kind of comic book like to me, I suppose. I didn't find it that threatening, but
I mean, Clara, some guys walking up to you on the street looking like that, you're not a little scared. You're a little scared.
I mean, I'm pretty much scared of any man walking up to me on the street.
Oh, yeah, okay. I understand.
But do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, he is dressed in a hoodie and he is tall and he's kind of stocky. So
sure,
even if he wasn't like hard face metal guy, he would still be scary. You might be thinking like, I'm going to get mugged or something.
Sure.
Or sexually assaulted, which is what I think we're actually thinking here. But what happens in the next scene is actually quite terrifying. So Owen Harris, whoever he is driving down the road with his wife and his little son in the back seat. And the fact that Ray manages to find Owen in a car, I mean, he's like,
how did he know he was going to be driving down this street at night at this hour?
Psychic connection to everything metal. I don't know. So he's driving the car, and Ray stops the car with his strength, like starting in the middle of the road, like he did at the beginning of the episode with Kurt's car. And he drags Owen from the car as his family scream, as his wife screams, Owen, and the little boy in the back seat's like, Daddy. And
that was really sad.
Yeah, It was pretty sad. And Owen is like completely bamboozled. Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Like, this is not a man who has been doing anything nefarious, or a man who's been hiding stuff, or who's been involved in criminal activity. This man is completely clueless as to what's going on.
He wasn't even involved in the cover-up of the documents. No. He has no idea what's going on.
Yeah, no idea. And he said, and Ray's got him on the ground and it's like standing over him and like starting to beat him or whatever. And he says, "You made me." And Owen says, "I'm just an accountant," which was my favorite line in the episode.
I'm just an accountant. Oh God, yeah.
I feel like that line could be used in any context, anywhere, in any story. Like, I'm just an accountant. So I'm like, you know, like, I don't know, my heart goes out to accountants everywhere who are watching that and we're like, I know, man, I feel you, Owen. I'm also just an accountant.
It's not my fault.
It's not my fault.
I'm just the accountant.
So Ray then hears, he's about to kill him, but then Ray hears Owen's son call to him. He calls to him once more and he's like, "Daddy." And he turns and he looks at the son, and it's this little boy in the backseat of the car looking terrified, looking out the window. He's about to watch his father die. It's just horrible. And you kind of see that Ray's face sort of changes and he sort of stops. And then he's like thinking, and we're like, oh my God, is he going to kill Owen, the accountant, the poor innocent accountant? And then it fades to black. So we don't know. But the next scene, Scully and Doggett arrive. And luckily Owen is okay. He's safe, if a little shaken, a little scared. And he's got his arms around his son and his wife. And we're like, yay, the accountant is alive. So for some reason, Ray didn't kill Owen. And Doggett and Scully have this conversation about it. They sort of say they may never know why he didn't kill him, why he chose not to. But Owen, the accountant, authorized the hazardous materials to be given.
I love how you just keep referring to him as Owen the accountant. He's not just Owen. He's not just a name. He has a title.
He has a title. Accountant Owen. He's not just a father. He's not just a husband. He's not just a human. He's an accountant.
Yep.
So Owen the accountant authorized the hazardous materials from the company to go to the salvage yard. And that's what accidentally infected Ray when he was working there. Now, it sort of sounds like Owen just signed some paperwork or just checked a box on a form and that he didn't really know what was in the materials or what was, you know, he's probably just told to do this, or I don't know. Anyway, it's just administration, it's paperwork, basically. So he is actually kind of an innocent person in all this. It was an accident, you know. And so then Doggett and Scully sort of talk about why they think Ray didn't kill Owen. And this is the part of the episode that probably should have come earlier, that comes at the very end, which is this tiny little discussion about whether he was really a man in the end, or whether he was a machine. And Doggett says a machine doesn't know blame, machine doesn't know mercy. And as the last shot of Ray is basically as a full metal man now, just his sort of eyes, half of his face, being crushed in a car, being smushed in a car in the salvage yard. So he's basically ending his own life, kind of. He's kind of like reconciling himself to his fate. And Scully says that he had maybe like a shred of humanity left, and that maybe prevented him from killing Owen the accountant. But it just all comes too late.
I agree. I feel like they're trying to infuse him with humanity without really setting that up. I mean, yes, they do have the final scene with him where he does not, in the end, kill Owen because he hears his son yelling, "Daddy." That's fine. But it kind of comes out of nowhere when he hasn't shown the same remorse or even hesitation in the past. And so to try to do this at the end, I'm not sure if it's an afterthought or just poor writing, or I don't know. I'm not quite sure what to make of it.
or showing any sort of compassion towards the wife that like nursed him while he was dying, the woman that he married when he got his life together after like overcoming a drug addiction, like who's supposed to loved. And I mean, Nora sort of in the beginning when she talks about how like they were so in love with each other, and they were a devoted couple, but that doesn't bring any of his humanity back. I don't know.
No.
Yeah, it's problematic. Like the whole debate of is he a machine or is he a man could have just been discussed throughout the episode, and we could have seen him morph from being a man into a machine, or being a machine morphing into a man. Like it could have just been a whole thing that was better explored, and it wasn't. And so are you going to keep your rating, or are you going to change your rating?
I'm okay with my rating. It wasn't offensive. I think that's the big thing for me.
It kind of was towards accountants.
Towards accountants. I am outraged for accountants everywhere. No, I think it's okay. It's a good background episode, I would say. You don't have to really pay attention. If you have insomnia, you could put it on and maybe you'll fall asleep. It was okay. I really saved my 5 and below for the offensive ones.
And it isn't one of the episodes that I would choose to rewatch if I was going to just rewatch anything from season 8. And this isn't to say that this episode immediately reflects everything in season 8. So Doggett and Scully make a very good partnership in other episodes. Mm-hmm. I think they actually make a very good investigative pair. And as like friends, I think they have a nice friendship.
Sure.
But it's just not shown in this episode really at all. So I wouldn't, if you're first time X-Files viewer, I wouldn't take this episode as an indication of what the whole of season 8 is like.
Sure. Yeah.
Just to remember that. So it's mailbag time. So just going to cover what our listeners, our fans, and the X-Files Basement XCast podcast fan group on Facebook think of this episode.
I'm very curious.
We posted a little call out saying, does anyone have any comments or anything they'd like to say? Chris Knowles just said Z, which I think is a snore, and I don't know if you're American or English. Depending on if you're American or English, it's either ZZZZZ or ZZZ.
Thank you for translating.
Yes, it's always important that we get the right pronunciation on the Xcast.
Of course.
And so yes, I assume he's fallen asleep, and I can safely say that I had the same experience at one point during the episode. Mm-hmm. Cortland Waters Bartley said that this is where I'm going to do Cortland an injustice, because she said, not a great episode, but I do have a soft spot for it since Muncie is very close to my hometown. So Cortland, I'm really sorry, but at least I didn't pronounce your hometown incorrectly. So she recognizes the area. I think that actually sometimes can make television more exciting if you're like, it was filmed right from where I come from.
Absolutely.
Heather Ben said Methyl Man only happened in the movies Agent Scully, which is a quote, and then capital letters, wink, 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 and then 3 emojis of a face throwing up. So I'm taking this that Heather does not appreciate the heavy-handed joke about Terminator.
She didn't like the joke. That's weird.
No, I feel that's what she's saying there. So Liam Shane Coughlin said, a cog, pardon the pun, in the engine of a far greater machine. Salvage strikes me at points as written when it was thought that Duchovny less setup might have been a little more permanent than it turned out to be the case, and held over into the mid-season in order to get the good stuff up front. For all sorts of reasons, a big disappointment. Excellent character work from the always entertaining duo of Patrick and Anderson keeps the episode from banality, though. So
that's very nice.
That's very nice of him to say. I don't actually feel that's what I felt when I was watching it in terms of the character work between Patrick and Anderson.
I thought Patrick had a little more spark to him than...
I felt like Rob Patrick had a bit more spark to him.
Gillian did.
And actually, though, when I read about this episode, I feel that I found out that actually there is a reason for that, because he was sort of, at the time, he was brought to the X-Files to hit a certain demographic of viewers, people that they thought had enjoyed the Terminator movies and knew him as an action star. I want to say it was like 13 to, I don't know, 25-year-olds or something. The viewing numbers had actually been growing, and by this particular episode, they had grown to a certain amount that they did actually feel that him being on the show had made a difference to viewing figures, and that's why he was so positive, if you know what I'm saying. Like, well, that's what I read anyway. That he was
very nice.
He hit his stride, and he was feeling really good about the show, and that's why he was maybe a little bit more sparky in the episode. Chris Knowles again says it was cool to see Ara Gross, another millennium to X-Files transplant. I do wonder why he wasn't on the show before, though. He's a great actor and could have carried a bigger role than he got here. I totally agree. That was Dr.
Something like that.
His role was so big that we can't remember his name.
It's a weird name. Sorry to all the people who have that name. I'm not used to it.
As he says, it's German, but has no H in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with Chris Knowles there. He is a really good actor. I've seen him in other stuff, and he just definitely needs to be given as much meat to play with as possible. Meteor role. Sure. AJ Black, ex-cast veteran, says it's a bit like watching a bad Marvel or DC Comics movie, except it just happens to have Scully and Doggett in it. It's rubbish.
Yeah.
Kinda, yeah. He's not wrong. Deana Ferreri says, I'm never sure, are the monsters just not that interesting, or maybe the slightly less skeptic dynamic is just less fun than the skeptic believer in everything jump to the craziest possible conclusion and be right dynamic? Or is it an excess of empathy, feeling too sad for Scully to enjoy any of it, but I'm not into this stretch of episodes? So I guess what I'd be curious to hear from Deana is like what she means by feeling too sad for Scully. Does she mean because of the fact that Scully's like trying to live her life without Mulder, and that might possibly be the case? Because Scully is kind of sad at some points. Well, sure. Not kind of, very sad at a lot of points in season 8. But maybe that's what she means.
That's what I would assume.
Yeah, but
I can understand that.
I'm just getting a slight feeling here that this isn't the episode that people love.
Not a fan favorite.
So before we go, do you have anything else you'd like to say about this episode, Annie?
I guess in thinking of it in relation to the Gulf War syndrome itself and how Nora was trying to place blame. Here's another accident. I mean, I don't want to say that the Gulf War syndrome was an accident. War is never an accident, but the things that happened, I'm sure were not. Well, I'm not going to say they're not intentional. I don't know what I'm trying to say about the Gulf War specifically, but finding or trying to place blame for something that you have no control over, and how I can see how those two things mirror each other. And I just don't know that worked very well in this episode. But I can maybe see what Jeffrey Bell, right? That's who wrote this. Yeah. I can see what Jeffrey Bell was trying to do, but maybe it needed more heart or depth or something to propel it forward, because we didn't get that, unfortunately. And I guess that's about it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's the idea that something's happened, or the end result of negligence on a large scale,
right?
But there's not specific individuals you can pinpoint to blame,
right?
It's, I think, quite psychologically hard for people. That, you know, it's a big corporation, or it is the State Department, or the army, or it's a big organization filled with multiple individuals, and in order for these decisions to be made, lots of people have been involved. It's gone through a whole chain of individuals in order to reach this point. And that, you know, the end result, if it's bad and affects people, the victims of this situation can't find a specific individual that they can point their finger at and blame, really.
Right.
And I mean, there is an element of like Gulf War syndrome that is part of that, really. You know, like can you point at a specific person and say this is, you know, I mean, it's often hard in those situations to find.
But then what are they saying about the veterans who were exposed? Are they heartless? I don't understand that parallel, right? Because if he's a metal man who's turned into this monster, he's not saying that about the victims of the Gulf War syndrome, right?
I mean, ultimately, they could have taken the whole Gulf War syndrome out of the whole storyline, and they could have just had it as he was a person who'd had a very rough and difficult life and who had been addicted to drugs and had overcome his addiction and had, you know, and had like basically managed to have a very loving relationship with his wife, and he'd found himself a job and basically worked himself out of a hole, and then was exposed in this sort of accidental industrial accident situation. So I don't know quite what the Gulf War syndrome really. I guess it gives Nora something to be upset about. It might explain why a 41-year-old died, but I don't know.
And we see her willingness to find answers and make the people pay, and then that translates over to when she finds him alive again, and same thing. She wants to help him and make the people pay. I
guess the idea of the Gulf War syndrome kind of covers up the possibility in her mind or anyone else's mind of him being exposed to something hazardous at the salvage yard. Because if he was a 41-year-old, healthy 41-year-old working in a salvage yard, and he just started getting really, really sick and dying and no one knew why,
right,
then there'd be more questions. Maybe Mulder.
I know. I keep saying it too.
Mulder's not going to touch this with a barge pole. He's like, I'm not coming back from this. But maybe Scully and Doggett would have gotten more involved earlier on or something. I don't know. It's a mishmash of things. And like a lot of this particular writers episodes, no offense Jeffrey, it's like a good idea that just is never fully realized in my mind, really. So that's
very true.
On that sad note, thank you so much, Annie, for coming on the Xcast once again. Where can people find you online, and what are you up to?
What am I up to? I'm not up to much. I'm just tweeting about X-Files and nonsense. And my handle is at BANANNIE_X. I help run Audio Fanfic Podcast. And you can find us on Twitter, on Tumblr, probably on Facebook as well. And that's just fun. Clara's going to come write us a Salvage fic, and I will read it for her. And that'll be great. We're going to fix this episode.
We're going to fix this episode.
Oh, and actually, I do run with my co-host another podcast called The Fangirls Library, where we kind of had the idea. We take all the nerdy things that we fangirl about or fanboy about. We're not about discrimination here. And what would you read if you're trying to kind of expand from fanfic and, you know, say David Duchovny wrote a book. Maybe you want to go read his book. Maybe the new Miss Marvel show is coming out. We read the Miss Marvel comic books. So that's something that you can look forward to as well from me.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So you can find me. My name is Clara Cook. You can find me on Twitter at ClaraJeanMC. I also have a podcast called The Tales We Tell about gender and women in film, television, and fiction. Annie's been on that podcast. So if you like us both talking on the same show, please do check it out. You can find that on Twitter at The Tales Podcast. You can find this podcast, The Xcast, on Twitter at the X_cast. And you can also head over to Facebook, join the X-Files Basement, the Xcast podcast fan group. So please do that and come over and have a chat and tell us what you think of this episode and what you think of the podcast. And until next time, just remember, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This.
Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast.
Why? Why do you even need to bring that up? You don't. We've done a story, and you're just using that for the. Oh, God. You know, it's like, no. I don't get it. I understand it. I understand Soongs. Soongs are always going to be in some way related to the Kang story because of genetics and the stuff like that they've done. I get it, but to do that, and if it comes in season 3, if it's a main thing in season 3, then I'll hold judgment. If it doesn't get mentioned in season 3, then what was the point?
Pick a disc.
Guardian reading lefty, which a
bleeding heart is one of the phrases we use a lot here in the US. Like, he cares about the homeless. I'm sort of shifting into my Limbo impersonation. Oh, he wants to house the homeless. What is he, a communist? Like, that's not. Maybe a little, but he's concerned with this. He's concerned with climate change. He's concerned with poverty. He's concerned with just general treatment of your fellow human beings. Like, I'm sure he resents having been subjected to trauma in his own life, and that gives him a great deal of sympathy, which I think is a good quality.
Third one, are the following names of hops US space shuttles or both?
Brilliant.
First one, Atlantis.
No, it's a US space shuttle, but is it a hop? I'm going to say it's just a US space shuttle.
Correct.
Good.
Have I got
to get best of 3 again?
I didn't know that was a space shuttle. Well, that's my poor knowledge, that is. Second one, Galaxy.
I know that's a hop because I've seen it in a pub recently. I don't know if it's a space shuttle, so I'm going to say both.
Just a hop, that one.
Oh, damn it.
Next one, Endeavour.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. The Xcast and X-Files podcast was created by Tony Black and is produced and hosted by Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair and Kurt North.
You can find the podcast on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the Xcast, and in our group, X-Files Basement, the Xcast podcast fan group, and on Instagram at the Xcast pod.
Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming a member on Patreon. Our patrons get early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes chats with our hosts and a thriving community of X-Files, and other premium interviews and specials. To find out more and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/thexcast. That's patreon.com/thexcast.
We are also part of the We Made This podcast network, full of popular culture shows, including our Millennium series, The Time Is Now. You can find all of our shows at our website, wemadethispod.com, or via Twitter at wemadethispod.
Thanks for listening and keep watching the skies.